All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the August 22nd Crossplane community meeting. Jared, who normally hosts this meeting, is on vacation on Vancouver Island at the moment. I'm very jealous, so I'm going to be covering for him. Nick, one of the Crossplane maintainers. I'm not as good at running meetings as Jared is, so forgive me if I get off track or go deep on something that I shouldn't. I think that this should be mostly kind of just a bunch of updates, and then we should have plenty of time at the end to chat about topics that folks have if we need. I think getting right into it, the biggest thing that's happening in the Crossplane community right now is the 1.17 release of Crossplane, which is due out any day now. I believe we actually have, we've done kind of almost all of the release. I believe there is, in fact, let's go over here. I believe there is a release candidate out already. I'm not sure if it actually shows up over here. Yeah, there we go. There is a draft release ready for 1.170, and 1.170 RC1 is out already. So you should actually, if you want to kick the tires on this release, be able to pull it and go run it now. Install it with Helm or however you would like. Definitely worth doing that. There are a couple of changes in this release. Let me get back here and see what Jared highlighted. One is Jared has actually made a sort of a pretty big contribution for the first time in a while. Jared was one of the first engineers in the Crossplane project when I started working on it. He was sort of one of the key sort of code contributors, but he's been doing more community management things for a while. He's been excited to get back into working on Crossplane. So he has added a feature that I think people are going to find pretty useful, which is, I don't know if we can actually see the design doc very easily, but get there in the end, which is effectively a cloud audit trail or changelog for providers. So at the moment, he's got that merged to Crossplane runtime, which is kind of the core library that providers are built with. And it's effectively going to give you all of this information for any change that any provider does on an external resource, which I think is pretty neat. At the moment, it's going to just have a sidecar container that logs those events in sort of a structured JSON format, so you can go feed them off to whatever system you would like to. But I think this is really going to help people understand exactly what Crossplane providers are doing. There's a number of other mechanisms. I know you can use like, AWS Cloud Trail and all that kind of stuff, but we thought that having the provider actually tell you directly, sort of straight from the source, here's what I'm doing, would be useful. So that's one big feature that is going to be part of the 1.17 release once it's picked up by providers. Another thing that's pretty exciting that I will admit was somewhat of a last minute thing that we pushed through. We had this on the plan for a long time, but we've been really busy, so we didn't get a chance to start until pretty late in the release. But composition functions are going to be V1 in the Crossplane 1.17 release. We're also marking native patch and transform deprecated, which I'm sure might be of concern or something that people might want to talk about. So we can chat about that towards the end if you would like. Fear not, we're not going to break native patch and transform. We're not removing native patch and transform. So if you have a composition that uses native patch and transform today, it should continue to work as normal. You might start to get a deprecation notice logged if you keep using it, but I believe that's the only impact. There's no plans to actually remove it. What we wanted to do was just communicate to people that we don't recommend it anymore. We recommend composition functions. They're ready to use. They, by and large, do everything that native patch and transform does, apart from one or two bugs that I know Bob's got top of mind at the moment. There are going to be some new APIs introduced for promoting composition functions to V1. This mostly only affects people who are writing composition functions, I believe, but basically Crossplane is going to send new RPCs at the version V1 instead of V1 beta 1. But we're going to update everything to be backward compatible. So what this means is if you've got a function today that's like running the beta code, it'll work with Crossplane 1.17 that's running the V1 code. and vice versa. If you update the function to use the new V1 code and you want to use an older version of Crossplane like V1.16 or 1.15, as long as it has function support, they should interoperate correctly. There's a translation layer that's pretty lightweight. So I'm personally really excited to get that over the post as part of this release. Normally, we would go through, I think, what priorities folks want from the community and sort of look at the unassigned issues and good first issues and things like that. Realistically, at this point, we're past the feature freeze, so we're not going to get anything into this release. But is there any particular issue that folks came here to advocate for that they might want to see in the 1.18 release?
I've got two issues that I posted at the bottom just to talk about. We can talk about them later. We can talk about them here. It doesn't really matter to me.
All right. Well, if that's the case, let's keep plowing through, and then hopefully we'll get to the bottom pretty quickly, and then we can talk about them then.
Sounds good.
Recent releases on the extensions and providers front. Looks like we've got a provider upjet AWS release and GCP as well. So I'm just Jared put all this together. I'm just reading it out to you. So it looks like the underlying Terraform provider has had a small version bump, a couple of new resources supported, and bug fixes. It's pretty generic. Function Pickle has been released as well. That's really cool. I chatted to Tim, the author of that function, a lot. For those who aren't familiar with Pickle, PKL, it is a configuration language that is similar in sort of spirit and goals, I think, to Q or KCL. Let's see if it's from Apple. Let's see if we can just. Oops, wrong function. Too many three-letter acronyms. Let's see if there's an example of function pickle in here. It's inline one, just so that we can see what pickle looks like. There you go. So that gives you an idea of what the pickle looks like here. It looks like this is adding a resource that is a config map to the desired resources. So excited to have one more option out there for people who want to use different languages to do composition. It looks like we've also got new releases of the Go templating function, which we recently saw by stats is the most popular function. It is the most downloaded one. And of provider PagerDuty. Like maybe some relatively minor updates in both of those guys. It's good to see. I know that some people were raising issue with finding some panics in upjet-based providers. So it looks like that has been commented yesterday. So I'm guessing that's, yeah, merged 3 hours ago. So that's probably not in a release yet, but it's good to see that that is under getting close attention. Jared was recently on a podcast that I have not watched yet, but it is a deep dive with Crossplane, and I've heard good things about it, so I highly recommend checking that out. Obviously, the link's all here in the agenda document. Upcoming demo day with Equinix, showing off the latest in Crossplane. And let's see, some updates on our LFX mentorship program. Is Inez on the call at the moment? I'm not sure, I can't see everyone. Don't think so. So our LFX mentor, Inez, has been working on validation broadly, sort of developer experience in Crossplane. I don't have the full details on where that's at, but it's going to be, I think, a really valuable thing once it gets merged. Looks like we're automating downloading dependencies of functions for the Crossplane and providers for the beta validate command. So that seems good. And here's a pretty big and exciting topic that I know is near and dear to Jared's heart. We are, I believe, now so the CNCF has an ordered list for projects to sort of go through graduation from sandbox to the heck is the stage that we're at, incubating incubating to graduated. So we proposed quite some time ago to go from incubating to graduated, and there's been a bunch of changes to the process since then. But I believe we were second in the list last time I heard. We may actually be at the top of the list now. And so Jared was working furiously last week before he went away on vacation to refactor our graduation proposal. So to get it up to speed with the latest things that the CNCF want from that proposal. So if you haven't already, I know a lot of people have, but going and just giving let's see, wow, this is a really long shoot. Going and giving a emoji react to this graduation application would be very useful for us. I'm sure if there is potentially yeah, it looks like we had 300 reacts on this closed graduation proposal that now has moved from being a pull request to an issue. So even if you did go and thumbs up that graduation proposal before as a pull request, please go and do it again as an issue since it's now moved to this much longer checklist. We already talked about composition functions going to V1. One little note on that is that I think the last thing that's ongoing there that's happening in parallel with the release is a documentation update. Our documentation at the moment is focused on native patch and transform, and as I mentioned, we're going to mark that deprecated. So we have plans for a larger update to the documentation. There is a tracking issue that's probably linked from this pull request. That talks about making the documentation functions first. We haven't fully designed this out, but something that we've imagined is anywhere that you see a composition, maybe there'll be a couple of tabs and you'll get to pick what does this composition look like in Go templating? What does it look like in KCL? What does it look like in Python? Sort of, we'll figure out what the most popular languages are and sort of show them off there. And then we think we'll also have guides for any particular sort of function that wants to be in our documentation there as well. I'm not going to get all of that done this week in time for the release, so we're taking sort of an MVP pass over the docs where we're just translating all of the references that we have in the docs today to native patch and transform, to use function patch and transform, and sort of providing a bunch of pointers and links to other functions to make it clear that we're not telling people that, we bless function patch and transform more than any other. It's just kind of the easiest thing to port the docs to at the moment until we get a chance to do a bigger pass over them. All right, and now we're getting into the PRs to discuss or that need attention, but I know that I went over everything that has come up until this point pretty quickly. So did anyone have any questions or comments on anything I've talked about thus far before we get into these specific topics that people have added to the agenda? Cool. All right. Sounds like we are all good. I see PRs to discuss from Suresh on provider Terraform.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, this is Suresh from Guideware Software. Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for your team for the incredible work in creating and maintaining Crossplane and the various providers. Yeah, so basically, we created a PR in provider Terraform with the changes to enable writing of the Terraform CLI logs to the container output before a few months. So we are kind of confused with the last two comments in the PR. So like we would appreciate if the team take a look at it and suggest what further changes we should do to have the PR merged.
Got it. I cannot comment on Dennis's comment there, but the other one was from me. And I really need to remove myself personally as a maintainer from Provider Terraform. I personally don't have the bandwidth to look at Provider Terraform. I know Bob spends a lot more time on it than me, so he might be more up to date with where the PR is and sort of what the sort of maintainer position is on it. My comment, take it as more informational than a blocker. This was a pointer to the work that I mentioned Jared did earlier, where we're now adding changelog support to all resources. And mostly what I was suggesting there was that it might be worth having a look at the architecture that he came up with for those changelogs, because it seems like it's solving a somewhat similar problem to, I think, the Terraform CLI logs. I did look at this pull request of this proposal months and months ago when it first began, and my understanding was we have this desire to show the actual Terraform CLI logs in provided Terraform, but then there's a question of where do we write them to, right? Because there's already there's already logs being written to standard out in provided Terraform that are not from the Terraform CLI. And if you intermix all of them, it could be tricky to figure out, in a log scraping tool, which one is a Terraform CLI log, which one is a log from provided Terraform itself. So the way that we ended up solving that for this changelogs feature that we're adding to all providers is we're going to have a sidecar, a separate container, so that container just logs changelogs, and then the core container logs all the things it does today already, kind of the operational logs for the provider, just to make it clearly distinguishable. So you can say, hey, give me all the logs that are change logs. Everything from this container will only ever be change logs. I can send them to some auditing system, potentially send them to a different backend than kind of the info and debug logs from the provider. So this was just a pointer to that, not necessarily a request to change anything, but more of an FYI that if you go and have a look at that architecture and it seems like something that you think is a good idea, you might consider adopting it for this pull request.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so to further progress on this PR show, should we follow up with Bob?
Yeah, Bob, do you know who are the most active maintainers on Provider Terraform at the moment? I see you a lot. I think Yuri is pretty active on there as well, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much me and Yuri. And I apologize, this is kind of fallen by the wayside, and it's just, time. But yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, I had asked for some rework, I think, and I think it was done. And I just need to go through a review one more time. I guess I'll leave it up to you. If if you think doing the sidecar changes that have gone into Crossplane runtime would make more sense, then that's fine. We can wait for that. Or assuming I don't have any more comments, which I don't think I will, I can go ahead and just merge it as is. So I guess I'll leave it up to you, Suresh. If you're happy with the current implementation, I'm happy with it. I mean, I definitely see the advantage that Nick's talking about in being able to push the push the logs into another location, but we could certainly handle that as a follow-up PR as well. So
Yeah, I
Yeah, just
understand writing it to a separate sidecar container makes more sense, but we already added additional attributes where we can filter out the logs from the main container itself, like operation and based on the workspace ID. But maybe as the first iteration, maybe we can have this PR merged, and we can decide if we need to enhance it to write it for the two sidecar container.
yeah, that's fine. I'll take another walk through the PR this afternoon, and assuming there's no follow-up, I'll just go ahead and merge it.
nice. Yeah, just to be clear, I suspect that you probably wouldn't be able to treat these as the change logs themselves. So you wouldn't. I don't know how much of Jared's code you'd be able to directly reuse, but you might be able to build something very similar. Was kind of my thinking.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
And again, I apologize for the delay. But
No problem. Thanks a lot.
just, my Zoom window's around so I can accept this suggestion. All right, cool. And all right, next two are yours, Bob. Enhance composition selection to support using fields from the composite. I think that these, I'm going to have similar feedback on both of these issues. Let me close a million tabs.
yeah, so this one, I mean, composition selection today works with labels, or obviously you can specify a specific composition, and that works great for nested composites where you can patch in the labels to use selection on the nested composite. It doesn't work really well on the top level composite because you have to expose labels to the claim, and the user has to know that they have to put in the specific label to get the composition you want. And so I was just looking at the implementation from the environment configs where you can, match the labels from the composite itself and specify a path. This, as I was thinking about it some more, it almost occurred to me that, composition selection functions might actually not be a bad idea to let you, have logic to select the composition with, but that's obviously a whole nother can of worms. So,
Yeah. I'm almost certain there is an older issue that is exactly this. I think it might have been Max from Essentia who raised it. I won't go and try and find it now. I agree with the spirit of what I think this is proposing, which I think is essentially saying rather than having people need to know about sort of the crossplane machinery fields. And I think Stephen kind of linked an issue here that I wrote where I was saying that in retrospect, if we ever did a V2 of crossplane, I
right.
kind of regret that all of these fields are so front and center, kind of cluttering up the custom API that you want to give to your users. So yeah, it'd be really nice to let you sort of say, hey, this particular field happens to be my label selectors, or happens to be the field that that I want to kind of use to figure out what composition to use. My only concern with anything like this is when we start getting into this kind of syntax, as Bob, you and I have spoken about this before, but for the record here, my concern is that it will devolve into patch and transform. It already kind of looks like a, hey, you go reach into this field path, which by itself might be fine. Like, I think if we were able to actually enforce the contract of you go and you can basically give us a field path to pull this value from, and that's it. There will never be any transform, there will never be any merging from multiple field paths, there'll never be anything like that, then that could potentially be okay. But we've heard loud and clear over the years that people find patch and transform unintuitive and confusing. So I'm just personally very sensitive to adding any features that look like they could, that 6 months from now, someone will open a pull request and be like, hey, I really want to take two field paths and merge them together or whatever, and then goes into patch and transform.
It's a slippery slope. Yeah. I mean, I don't know where you draw the line, right? I mean, obviously, I think drawing the line at saying, look, this is as far as it goes. We're going to key off of one field and that's enough. I think at that point you have enough. You have enough functionality in composition functions to at least be able to say, okay, well now if the second field is what I want, then I can go do something else. But yeah, I mean, it's
I'm also wary of saying I've got a function sort of shaped hammer and everything's a nail, right? Because I know that writing a function is somewhat advanced for folks. But when I think about alternatives to this, the idea that you briefly mentioned of a composition selection function is interesting to me. I could imagine that being specified at the XRD level or something like that, sort of saying all XRs of this type run this function to figure out what composition they should use or something like that. So it's worth a comment or a tracking issue or something to follow up on. I think at this point in time, yeah, my personal perspective on this issue is I like the idea of the functionality. It seems useful. Just to, the how we build it is the only part I'm concerned with.
Okay, that's great. I don't know if anybody, I mean, I was kind of looking for input from the community as well. Does anybody else see the same problem? Right now we've worked around it by having basically a wrapper composition that invokes itself, right? So you have a composition that patches in what you want and then invokes itself and selects a different composition for the same composite, which is functional, but it's obviously not very friendly for maintenance. So
I want to try and find this one that Max raised to see if there's any context on there, but oh, here we go. Maybe this custom composition selectors. I thought that it might be harder to find than that. Yeah, so I think this is roughly the same kind of thing. He's got an XRD and he's saying this override spectrum composition selector yada yada, and I've thumbs it up. So obviously, I think it's a great idea. Doesn't look like it got a lot of other interactions from folks, but I will. Just like that, just for context. All right, I don't hear anyone else immediately chiming in on that, but definitely do feel free to go and thumbs up the issue, or if you have any ideas about sort of what kind of user experience you'd like there, please drop a comment on that issue 5869 there, so that we have some more ammunition to figure out how we're going to go do this. And this one is something that we were more recently discussing that is along a similar theme. Bob, do you want to sort of summarize the issue that you wrote up here?
Yeah, this is, like you say, this is a very similar issue related to composition function inputs instead of composition selection. Right now, there's listed there the ways that you can get input into a composition function. And basically, the scenario is we have generic composition functions that don't know anything about the composite. We don't want them to know anything about the composite. We just want them to do specific things given a set of inputs. And the only way to handle those inputs today would be to put hard code them in a composition, or stick them somewhere in a context and have the function go get them. And it just seemed to be a little bit more useful to be able to say, you know what, assign this input to the function from this composite field path, so that we could say, I guess the example that I always fall back on is function cider, which is an upbound composition function. They actually implemented, you give them a set of paths for cider information, for example, host numbers and that kind of stuff, and they will go, reference those. They'll resolve the references to the composite paths internally to the function, do the calculations, and spit out the results. And rather than have every composition function have to implement that resolving logic, I thought it would be more useful to be able to have a way to just say, Crossplane to go get the values for you and hand it off to the composition function as defined inputs. So, and as you say, Nick, you and I discussed it a little bit, and obviously some of the same issues.
Yeah,
So,
is it something that anyone on the call has sort of hit or felt sort of a desire for while working with functions or compositions?
Actually, the one I added just after, I think, is related as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But it's specific to credential. So right now, it's possible to authenticate with a function passing credential to the function. Function were a good candidate to have kind of the data source in Terraform to be able to retrieve data from a provider. And so I wanted to use a function to do that. But my problem is that I'm managing multiple accounts from the same control plane. And so that will mean that I need different credential for each of the function run. And I'm not sure, I don't think it's possible to do that. Because I will either need to, in advance, fill out all the credential. And I'm not sure I could select which one I will use. Or as Bob mentioned, maybe it will have to be baked into the function code itself to be able to have that logic.
Got it. All right. Well, I can see how those are related, but let's I'll focus on the sort of proposal that Bob's got, then we can go more specifically to that one. Yeah, Bob and I have spoken about this, but just replaying my perspective again. One of my concerns is just this API potentially introducing sort of patch transform as an input to the function. So something that would help me feel better about this proposal is other ideas as to sort of how we could do that potentially. And then the other thing that it's definitely not a blocker, but just that I'm wary of is that, even just listing out all of these, there's, all these places that sort of stuff can pass data to the function. It's just making sure that this is all somewhat cohesive sort of thing, and that it doesn't get, that whenever you add power or additional expressiveness, you also tend to make the system more complex and hard to reason about. So it's just another variable there. I'm not convinced that this is like, the straw that would break the camel's back for that or anything like that, but it's just something that I'm kind of thinking about. So I'm definitely not, opposed to this, Bob. I think actually one or two people might have actually brought this up during the function design, potentially very early on while they're on the V1 Alpha 1 track. So you're definitely not the first person who's wanted this. But yeah, I certainly would like to maybe let it bake a little bit, see what other people think, see if folks can come up with some good ideas about sort of the API, UX, and things like that before we act on it personally.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, Colin, this one is interesting. When I just trying to mentally load up this issue here. Yeah, when I implemented passing just plain old secrets over to composition functions, so Crossplane reads the secret and sends it to the function. The API that we sort of designed to sort of pass those credentials from Crossplane to a function did accommodate for adding other types of credentials, and we were aware based on what we've seen with obviously the Kubernetes ecosystem in general, and also the Crossplane providers and things like that. The web identity, IRSA, all that kind of stuff was probably going to be in demand, right? I think where it's quite complex though is there is a question of whose identity, right? Like mostly with functions, we kind of see them as a sidecar or an extension to Crossplane. So sort of Crossplane reads the secret and just passes it to the function. The function doesn't, read anything from its Kubernetes environment or its pod environment. One of the sort of ideal design constraints that we've had for functions, it hasn't mattered that much in practice yet, but I'm hesitant to sort of to cut ourselves off, is we would like it if you could run functions anywhere. Like by convention today, functions get deployed as a pod inside the same Kubernetes API server as Crossplane. But it would be neat if, you could imagine having a serverless function that's just running in Lambda or something like that at some point, or outside of the API server, especially if you've got tons and tons of cross-plane control planes that you might want to not have the same function deployed to all of them and just use one function for all of your control planes, for example. So that sort of design consideration or constraint informs this a little bit. You can't really necessarily, as far as I know, I'm not a web identity expert, but if the function's not running inside a Kubernetes cluster at all, then I don't think you're going to be able to use the function's web identity itself. So that means then I guess Crossplane has to sort of use its identity and pass its identity to the function, and then I'm not sure if that's actually going to work. Does that have anything to do with what you're thinking about with this issue, Clement, or am I just rambling about web identity and a vague tangent?
No, it makes sense. And I've like you said, we initially only had secret, and it could be extended to other type of data that we want to pass to the function. But yeah, the second part of it was nice because I think it's coming back to what we were saying earlier. Having a way to pass data based on the composite to be able to, like, let's say I generate credential for AWS. I put them all on the credential field of the function, so they all pass to the function, but still I need to select which credential I'm going to use to interact with AWS.
Yeah, I'm a little reluctant to introduce a sort of a function config or anything like that. Ideally functions would be that they've already got a lot of inputs and configurability in the composition, sort of unlike a provider maybe. So this is I guess maybe my perspective on this one personally is similar to basically every issue we've spoken about so far. +1 for supporting passing web identity credentials to functions. The question is, just always the devil's in the detail. How do we do that? How can we find a way to do it? Yeah, so this could perhaps even warrant a little one pager or something like that to sort of explore some of the options, or at least just continue the discussion in this issue, like weigh in on let's see, Lucas, weigh in on Lucas's sort of proposals here, and let folks know what you all would like to see from this and whether this is a problem for you as well.
And for the context of this one, to me, it's highly tied to querying data on providers. Is there any work on this one? Because I know there was an issue open quite a while ago. There was no update on it. So is this still something that is being explored or not at the moment?
Can you elaborate on what you mean by querying data from providers?
Yeah, querying data from external API to have like kind of data source behavior in Terraform.
Oh, yes. There hasn't been any activity on that recently that I'm aware of. It's still something that we'd like. We haven't, decided not to do it or anything like that. I know we kind of built our observer-only resources, and then there was some speculation about what if we write functions that query that kind of stuff. And I can see what you mean, that you might need to give the function permission to go talk to AWS or whatever external system you're working with in order to do that querying. So yeah, thanks for the link. That is something that we still want to do. Looks like pretty popular as well, but I don't think anyone's actively working on it, like Crossplane maintainers wise. So I do appreciate that you're kind of looking into that. I would love to see a function that worked that way. It'd be really cool to see one prototyped out, even if it was just using secrets, kind of as a sort of a stopgap that people probably won't be able to use in production to see how it works.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry. The answer to all of those issues was, yeah, sounds like a good idea, but I'm not sure how we're going to do it. Cool. All right. That gets us to the end of the agenda. Does anyone have any parting thoughts or things that they would like to point out before we call it a day? Right. Well, thanks all for coming to the community call this week. Hopefully I made some degree of sense. And yeah, next time you'll be back to Jared running it. Have a good rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye.